The fluorescent lights in courtroom 7 of the Maricopa County Superior Court buzzed ominously overhead as Miguel Rodriguez adjusted his ill-fitting borrowed suit for the 100th time that morning. His calloused hands, weathered from 15 years of construction work, trembled uncontrollably as he gripped the edge of the defendant's table. The wood felt cold beneath his palms, much like everything else in his life had become since that terrible night 6 months ago when his world collapsed into an unimaginable nightmare. District Attorney Rebecca Sterling stood before the jury like a predator circling wounded prey, her voice sharp and calculated as she painted Miguel as a monster in human clothing. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she declared, her red heels clicking against the polished marble floor with each deliberate step, "Miguel Rodriguez is not the grieving husband he pretends to be. He is a cold-blooded killer who murdered his wife, Carmen, in a fit of rage, and disposed of her body so expertly that we may never find her remains." Miguel's defense attorney, David Chun, a overworked public defender with thick glasses and a perpetually wrinkled suit, frantically scribbled notes on a yellow legal pad. He had warned Miguel from the beginning that this case would be nearly impossible to win. The evidence was circumstantial, yes, but it painted a devastating picture that would be difficult for any jury to ignore. The prosecution had methodically built their case like a house of cards, each piece of evidence stacked carefully upon the next. Mrs. Henderson, from next door, had testified with tears streaming down her weathered face about the screaming she heard that night, Carmen's voice rising in terror, followed by Miguel's angry shouting, then an eerie silence that lasted until dawn. The woman's testimony had been devastating, her genuine emotion resonating with every member of the jury. Then there was Miguel's alibi, or rather, the complete lack of one. He claimed he had gone for a long drive after the argument to cool down, stopping at various gas stations and convenience stores throughout Phoenix. But security cameras told a different story, or rather, they told no story at all. None of the surveillance footage from the locations he claimed to visit showed any sign of him. Either Miguel was lying about where he went, or he had been incredibly unlucky with camera blind spots and system malfunctions. The most damning evidence, however, was Carmen's blood. Forensic expert Dr. Patricia Moore had testified that Carmen's DNA was found on Miguel's work shirt, not just a few drops, but significant staining that suggested close contact during a violent encounter. The blood spatter pattern, according to Dr. Moore's professional analysis, was consistent with someone being struck repeatedly while bleeding from facial injuries. Miguel closed his eyes and tried to block out the prosecutor's venomous words, but Sterling's voice cut through his mental defenses like a razor blade. "The defendant wants you to believe that his wife simply vanished into thin air," she continued, gesturing dramatically toward Miguel with obvious disgust. "That Carmen Rodriguez, a devoted mother who never spent a single night away from her 3-year-old daughter, suddenly decided to abandon her family without a trace. But the evidence tells a different story, a story of domestic violence, escalating arguments, and ultimately, murder. The worst part of this entire ordeal wasn't even his own potential conviction and life sentence. It was what this nightmare had done to his daughter Emma, the little girl who once filled their small house with laughter and endless chatter had become a ghost of her former self. She sat in the gallery behind him now, clutched tightly in the arms of Carmen's sister Maria, her dark eyes vacant and hollow, like empty windows in an abandoned building. Emma hadn't spoken a single word since that horrible night. Not one syllable. The child psychologist, Dr. Patricia Williams, had explained to the court that Emma was suffering from selective mutism brought on by severe trauma. Whatever the 3-year-old had witnessed that night had been so devastating that her young mind had simply shut down its ability to communicate verbally. Dr. Williams had tried everything in her professional toolkit. Play therapy sessions where Emma could express herself through dolls and toys yielded nothing but blank stares. Art therapy produced only scribbled black marks on white paper, as if the child was trying to color out some terrible memory. Music therapy, which often worked miracles with traumatized children, fell on deaf ears. Emma would sit motionless during the sessions, occasionally rocking back and forth, but never making a sound. The cruel irony was that Emma was their only witness to what really happened that night. She was the only person who could definitively say whether Miguel had hurt Carmen or if something else had occurred. But her traumatic silence had rendered her testimony impossible to obtain, leaving Miguel's fate in the hands of 12 strangers who had heard only the prosecution's version of events. Miguel stole a glance back at his daughter, his heart breaking anew at the sight of her small frame, curled up like a frightened animal. Emma had been such a bright, precocious child before all this happened. She had been reading simple books at age 2, constantly asking questions about everything around her, and following Carmen around their small house like an enthusiastic shadow. Now she barely ate, rarely slept through the night without screaming from nightmares, and responded to the world around her with nothing but silence and fearful stares. As Prosecutor Sterling concluded her opening statement with a passionate plea for justice, Miguel felt the weight of despair settling over him like a heavy blanket. The jury members' faces reflected the prosecutor's carefully crafted narrative. They saw him as a guilty man trying to escape consequences for his heinous actions. He could read it in their expressions, the way they avoided making eye contact with him, the subtle shifts in their body language that screamed condemnation. David Chun would do his best during the defense phase, but they both knew the uphill battle they faced. Without Carmen's body, without Emma's testimony, and with circumstantial evidence pointing toward Miguel's guilt, the case seemed hopeless. Miguel's only prayer was that somehow, miraculously, the truth would find a way to surface before 12. Angry citizens decided to lock him away forever for a crime he didn't commit. The bailiff called for a brief recess, and as the courtroom began to empty, Miguel remained seated, staring at his hands and wondering if he would ever hold his daughter again, or if Emma would grow up, believing her father was the monster who took her mother away forever. Detective Sarah Chun had been working missing persons cases for 12 years, and she had never encountered a situation that haunted her quite like the Rodriguez case. As she sat in her cramped office at Phoenix Police Department headquarters, staring at the wall of evidence photos showing Carmen Rodriguez's smiling face next to crime scene images of blood-stained clothing, she knew they were missing something crucial. The prosecution's case was built on assumptions and circumstantial evidence, but her gut instincts, honed by over a decade of investigative work, screamed that Miguel Rodriguez was not a killer. The breaking point came during the third week of trial testimony. Emma Rodriguez had been brought to court again, as required by law, to sit in the gallery where the jury could see the human cost of the alleged crime. But watching the 3-year-old's vacant stare and catatonic silence was becoming unbearable for everyone in the courtroom, including Judge Margaret Harrison, who had presided over hundreds of criminal cases, but had never seen a child so completely broken by trauma. Dr. Patricia Williams, the child psychologist, had submitted yet another report stating that traditional therapeutic approaches were failing completely. Emma's selective mutism showed no signs of improvement, and in fact, seemed to be worsening. The child had stopped eating properly, had developed severe separation anxiety from her Aunt Maria, and was experiencing night terrors so intense that she would wake up screaming, but still unable to form words. That's when Detective Chun remembered a conversation she'd had 6 months earlier with Officer Jennifer Martinez from the K-9 unit. Martinez had mentioned an unusual case where her German Shepherd, Rex, had somehow managed to comfort a kidnapped child who had been too traumatized to speak to human investigators. The dog had sat with the 8-year-old victim for hours, and something about Rex's presence had eventually helped the child feel safe enough to reveal crucial details about her captor's location. Rex was no ordinary police dog. While most canine units specialized in drug detection, explosives, or suspect apprehension, Rex had been trained in an experimental program that combined traditional police work with therapeutic intervention techniques. The 5-year-old German Shepherd had an almost supernatural ability to sense emotional distress in children, and had been credited with helping solve 3 previous cases involving traumatized young witnesses. Officer Martinez was initially skeptical when Detective Chun called with her desperate request. "Sarah, I understand you're grasping at straws here, but Rex isn't a miracle worker," she had said over the phone. "And bringing a police dog into an active murder trial? Judge Harrison will think we've all lost our minds." But Detective Chun was persistent. She had watched Miguel Rodriguez's face during every day of testimony, studying his reactions, his body language, his emotional responses to the evidence presented against him. Everything about his demeanor suggested a man destroyed by grief and confusion, not guilt and deception. His tears during his daughter's court appearances seemed genuine, his protests of innocence rang true, and his obvious anguish over Emma's condition appeared to be that of a loving father watching his child suffer, not a murderer trying to maintain a facade. The conversation with Judge Harrison was even more challenging. The elderly judge, known for running a strict courtroom with little tolerance for unconventional procedures, listened with raised eyebrows as Detective Chun outlined her proposal. "You want to bring a police dog into my courtroom to interact with a traumatized child witness during an active murder trial?" Judge Harrison had asked, her voice dripping with incredulity. "Detective Chun, this is a court of law, not a petting zoo." But something in Detective Chun's passionate argument must have resonated with the judge's sense of justice. Perhaps it was the detective's reminder that Emma was their only potential witness to the truth. Or maybe it was Judge Harrison's own growing discomfort with the prosecution's circumstantial case. After consulting with both legal teams and reviewing preceding cases involving therapy animals in courtroom settings, the judge made an unprecedented decision to allow a brief, controlled interaction between Emma and Rex during the lunch recess. The logistics of bringing Rex into the courthouse were complex. Security protocols had to be modified, insurance liability issues needed to be addressed, and both legal teams insisted on having child psychologists present to monitor Emma's reaction. Dr. Williams was cautiously optimistic but warned everyone that any additional trauma to the child could cause permanent psychological damage. Officer Martinez spent the morning preparing Rex for what would be the most important assignment of his career. The German Shepherd seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, remaining unusually calm and focused during their pre-session briefing. Martinez had worked with Rex long enough to recognize his different behavioral modes, the intense alertness he showed during drug searches, the controlled aggression he displayed during suspect apprehensions, and the gentle, almost human-like empathy he exhibited when working with traumatized children. As they approached the courthouse that afternoon, Martinez noticed Rex's demeanor shift into what she privately called his therapy mode. His usual confident stride became more measured and deliberate, his ears positioned forward in a listening posture, and his entire body language radiated calm, patient energy. It was as if the dog understood that he was about to encounter someone who needed his help in ways that went far beyond traditional police work. The courtroom had been cleared of everyone except essential personnel. Judge Harrison, Detective Chun, Dr. Williams, both legal teams, Maria Rodriguez, Emma's aunt, and a court reporter. Miguel Rodriguez had been allowed to remain, though he was positioned far enough away that Emma wouldn't feel pressured by his presence. The little girl sat in her usual spot in the gallery, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit, her dark eyes reflecting the same emptiness they had shown for months. When Officer Martinez and Rex entered through the main courtroom doors, the silence was so complete that everyone could hear the soft clicking of the dog's nails against the polished floor. Rex's amber eyes immediately found Emma, and something passed between them, a recognition perhaps, or simply the instinctive connection between two souls who understood suffering. As Rex began his slow, careful approach toward the traumatized child, everyone in the courtroom held their breath, knowing they were about to witness either a breakthrough that could change everything or another heartbreaking failure in a case that had already seen too many dead ends. The next few minutes would determine whether justice would be served or whether an innocent man would spend the rest of his life in prison for a crime he didn't commit. The silence in courtroom 7 was so profound that the gentle hum of the air conditioning system sounded like a roaring engine. Every person present seemed afraid to breathe, as if the slightest sound might shatter whatever delicate magic was beginning to unfold between the traumatized child and the extraordinary German shepherd who had been brought in as their last hope. Rex moved with the calculated precision of a trained professional, but there was something more in his approach, an almost supernatural understanding of the fragile human being he was about to encounter. His massive paws made barely a whisper against the courtroom floor as he advanced, his amber eyes never leaving Emma's small form huddled in the gallery seat. Officer Martinez had seen Rex work with traumatized children before, but never in circumstances this critical, never with stakes this monumentally high. Emma Rodriguez sat frozen like a delicate porcelain doll that might crack at the slightest touch. Her tiny hands clutched her stuffed rabbit so tightly that her knuckles had turned white, and her dark eyes, once bright and full of childhood, wonder reflected the same vacant stare she had worn for 6 months. Dr. Patricia Williams watched intently from her position near the witness stand, her clinical training warring with her maternal instincts as she observed the child who had become the center of an impossible case. Detective Sarah Chun found herself holding her breath as Rex positioned himself approximately 6 feet from Emma's chair. The dog's training was evident in every controlled movement, close enough to establish connection, far enough to avoid overwhelming the traumatized child. Rex lowered himself into a sitting position with fluid grace, his tail motionless, his ears positioned forward in a listening posture that suggested he was tuning into frequencies that humans couldn't perceive. Judge Margaret Harrison, who had presided over her courtroom with iron discipline for 23 years, found herself leaning forward in her chair despite her usual stern composure. She had agreed to this unprecedented intervention against her better judgment, but something about watching this trained police dog demonstrate such remarkable sensitivity toward a broken child was moving her in ways she hadn't expected. For 15 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. Emma remained motionless, occasionally glancing at Rex, but never making any gesture toward him. The stuffed rabbit stayed pressed against her chest like a shield against the world, and her small body seemed to shrink even further into the oversized courtroom chair. Dr. Williams made careful notes on her clipboard, documenting every micro-expression and behavioral nuance, while the legal teams watched with growing skepticism. Defense attorney David Chun began to shift uncomfortably in his seat, wondering if this desperate gambit would backfire and somehow make his client's situation even worse. Prosecutor Rebecca Sterling maintained her professional poker face, but privately she was relieved that this unorthodox attempt appeared to be failing. The last thing she needed was some dramatic breakthrough that would undermine her carefully constructed case against Miguel Rodriguez. Then, at exactly 2:47 p.m., according to the courtroom's digital clock, something shifted in the atmosphere. Rex's ears perked up slightly, though he remained perfectly still in his sitting position. Emma's grip on her stuffed rabbit loosened almost imperceptibly, and for the first time in months, she lifted her head to look directly at the German shepherd rather than offering quick, fearful glances. Officer Martinez felt a familiar tingling sensation in her chest, the same feeling she got when Rex was about to make a breakthrough in a difficult case. The dog's breathing had changed subtly, becoming more focused and deliberate, and she could see the almost human-like intelligence in his eyes as he seemed to communicate with Emma on some level that transcended normal understanding. Miguel Rodriguez, who had been sitting rigidly in the defendant's chair with his back to his daughter, felt an overwhelming urge to turn around. Something was happening behind him. He could sense it in the changed energy of the courtroom, in the way the whispered conversations had completely ceased, in the electric anticipation that seemed to fill the air like the moments before a thunderstorm. Dr. Williams later wrote in her report that what happened next defied everything she understood about childhood trauma and selective mutism. Emma slowly, almost dreamlike, slid down from her chair. Her small bare feet touched the courtroom floor with the tentative quality of someone testing water temperature. She took one small step toward Rex, then another, her movements so careful and deliberate that she seemed to be walking on glass. The German Shepherd remained absolutely motionless as Emma approached, though Officer Martinez could see the barely contained excitement in his amber eyes. This was the moment Rex had been trained for, the critical instant when a traumatized child decided to trust him enough to make contact. His entire body radiated calm patience, but Martinez could sense the dog's intense focus and his almost human understanding of the profound importance of this encounter. When Emma finally reached Rex, she stood beside him for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds according to the courtroom clock. Her small hand hovered uncertainly over the dog's head, trembling like a leaf in a gentle breeze. The stuffed rabbit dangled forgotten from her other arm as she focused all her attention on this moment of potential connection. Detective Chun found herself mentally willing the child to make contact, knowing that everything Miguel's freedom, Emma's healing, the truth about Carmen's disappearance, might depend on what happened in the next few seconds. The courtroom had become a pressure cooker of anticipation, with 12 potential jurors, lives hanging in the balance based on the actions of a 3-year-old girl and a remarkably intuitive police dog. When Emma's tiny fingers finally made contact with Rex's soft fur, the dog's response was so subtle that only Officer Martinez noticed it, a barely perceptible relaxation in his shoulders, a slight shift in his breathing that indicated his relief at successfully establishing this crucial connection. Emma's touch was feather-light at first, then gradually became more confident as Rex remained perfectly still, allowing her to explore the sensation of his warm, reassuring presence. Then, in a voice so quiet that several people in the courtroom weren't sure they had heard anything at all, Emma Rodriguez spoke her first words in 6 months. "Find Mama." The impact of those 2 simple words was instantaneous and earth-shattering. The 2 words, "Find Mama," hit the courtroom like a lightning strike, sending shockwaves through every person present and instantly transforming what had been a straightforward murder trial into something far more complex and mysterious. Judge Margaret Harrison's gavel remained frozen in midair as she processed the implications of what she had just witnessed. In 23 years on the bench, she had never experienced a moment that so completely upended the fundamental assumptions of a criminal case. Rex's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. The German Shepherd's entire body language shifted from calm therapy mode to intense search and rescue alertness. His ears shot forward, his nostrils flared as he began processing scent information that humans couldn't detect, and he started emitting a low, urgent whine that Officer Martinez had heard only twice before in their 3-year partnership, both times when Rex had located missing persons who were still alive but in mortal danger. Detective Sarah Chun felt her heart hammering against her ribcage as the full weight of Emma's words sank in. "Find Mama" wasn't the confused utterance of a traumatized child trying to process her mother's death. It was a desperate plea from the only witness to whatever had really happened that night 6 months ago. The word "find" implied that Carmen Rodriguez wasn't dead and buried somewhere. She was lost, missing, possibly injured, but potentially still alive and waiting to be rescued. Prosecutor Rebecca Sterling's carefully constructed case began crumbling in real time as she watched. Rex paced frantically toward the courtroom exit, his professional training overriding courtroom protocol as his search instincts kicked into high gear. The dog kept looking back at Emma, then toward the doors, whining with increasing urgency, as if trying to communicate that time was running out for someone who desperately needed help. "Your Honor," defense attorney David Chun stammered, his voice barely controlled as he rose from his chair. "I motion for an immediate mistrial. This evidence completely changes the nature of the charges against my client. If Carmen Rodriguez is still alive somewhere, then Miguel Rodriguez cannot possibly be guilty of her murder." Judge Harrison's mind raced through the legal implications of what was unfolding in her courtroom. A mistrial would halt the proceedings, but it wouldn't automatically clear Miguel of charges the prosecution could potentially refile different charges or argue that the child's words were unreliable. However, Rex's behavior was impossible to ignore. The dog's search and rescue response was the kind of evidence that couldn't be fabricated or misinterpreted. "Bailiff, clear the courtroom immediately," Judge Harrison commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos that was beginning to erupt in the gallery. "I want everyone except essential personnel out now. Court stenographer, make sure you're recording every detail of what's happening here." Emma, meanwhile, seemed unaware of the legal earthquake she had triggered. She remained beside Rex, her small hand still resting on his fur, but her eyes had changed. For the first time in 6 months, there was something alive in her gaze, not happiness, but a desperate urgency that matched the dog's behavior. She began tugging on Rex's collar, trying to pull the massive German shepherd toward the courtroom doors. "Go find Mama," Emma whispered, her voice slightly stronger now, but filled with an anguish that broke every adult heart in the room. "Mama lost. Mama scared." Officer Martinez had never seen Rex display this level of agitation during a controlled interaction. The dog was trained to remain calm in all situations, but his search and rescue instincts were overriding his courtroom protocol training. She made a split-second decision that would later be cited in police training manuals across the country. "Your Honor," Martinez called out, "I need to follow Rex's lead immediately. He's giving me every signal that indicates an active search and rescue situation. If Carmen Rodriguez is alive somewhere and in danger, every minute we delay could be the difference between life and death." Detective Chun was already on her radio, calling for backup units and search teams to stand by. The Phoenix Police Department's Missing Persons Division, which had officially closed the Carmen Rodriguez case 3 months earlier when she was presumed dead, was about to reopen what might become the most intensive manhunt in the city's history. Miguel Rodriguez sat in stunned silence as the courtroom erupted around him. For 6 months, he had maintained his innocence while watching the evidence pile up against him, feeling helpless as his world collapsed piece by piece. Now, his 3-year-old daughter, the only witness to that horrible night, was telling the world what he had suspected all along. Carmen wasn't dead. She was missing and needed help. Prosecutor Sterling found herself in an unprecedented legal position. Her entire case had been built on the assumption that Carmen Rodriguez was dead and that Miguel had killed her. If Carmen was actually alive somewhere, every piece of evidence would need to be reinterpreted. The blood on Miguel's shirt, the argument that neighbors heard, his inability to provide a solid alibi, all of it took on completely different meanings if Carmen had left the house that night voluntarily, and then encountered some other form of danger. Rex had now reached the courtroom doors and was scratching frantically at the wood, his whining becoming increasingly desperate. Emma followed him, her small voice repeating, "Find Mama, find Mama," like a mantra that had finally been released after months of being trapped inside her traumatized psyche. Dr. Patricia Williams watched in professional amazement as Emma's selective mutism appeared to dissolve in real time. The child was not only speaking, but she was communicating with purpose and clarity. Whatever memories had been locked away by trauma were beginning to surface, triggered by her connection with Rex and her desperate need to help her mother. Judge Harrison made a decision that would later be studied in law schools as either brilliant jurisprudence or judicial overreach. "This trial is hereby suspended pending emergency investigation," she announced. "Officer Martinez, take your dog and follow his instincts. Detective Chun, mobilize every available resource. If there's even a chance that Carmen Rodriguez is alive and in danger, we have a moral and legal obligation to act immediately." As the courtroom doors burst open and Rex raced into the courthouse hallway with Emma, Officer Martinez, and Detective Chun close behind, Miguel Rodriguez found himself experiencing something he hadn't felt in 6 months. Hope. His daughter had spoken. His innocence might finally be proven. And somewhere out there, the woman he loved might still be alive, waiting to be found. The moment Rex burst through the courthouse doors and into the blazing Arizona afternoon sun, his behavior transformed from urgent to absolutely frantic. Officer Jennifer Martinez had worked with search and rescue dogs for 8 years, but she had never witnessed anything like what was happening with her partner. Rex wasn't just following a scent trail, he was following something far more complex and mysterious, as if he had tapped into some invisible connection that linked him directly to Carmen Rodriguez's location. Detective Sarah Chun grabbed her radio as she sprinted behind Rex and Martinez, her voice crackling with urgency as she coordinated with Phoenix Police Dispatch. "This is Detective Chun, badge number 2847. I need all available units to converge on the Maricopa County Courthouse immediately. We have a potential live rescue situation connected to the Carmen Rodriguez case. The suspect is no longer a suspect. We're looking for a missing person who may be in critical condition." Emma Rodriguez ran alongside the adults with a determination that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. The 3-year-old who hadn't spoken or shown emotion for 6 months was now displaying an energy and focus that seemed to come from somewhere deep within her traumatized psyche. "Mama far away," she kept repeating breathlessly as she struggled to keep up with Rex's powerful stride. Mama calling Emma. Mama hurt bad. Rex led them through downtown Phoenix with the confidence of a bloodhound following a fresh trail, but Martinez knew something was different about this search. Typically, search and rescue dogs followed actual scent molecules left behind by missing persons. But Carmen Rodriguez had disappeared 6 months ago. Any normal scent trail would have been obliterated long ago by weather, traffic, and urban contamination. Whatever Rex was following was something else entirely. The German Shepherd's path was erratic and seemingly random to untrained observers. But Martinez recognized the pattern of a dog working multiple scent sources. Rex would sprint forward for several blocks, then suddenly stop and circle back, his nose working furiously as he processed information that humans couldn't detect. His ears remained pinned forward in maximum alertness mode, and his tail stayed rigid and motionless, classic indicators that he was locked on to something significant. Miguel Rodriguez had been released from the courthouse detention area and was following the search party in Detective Chun's police cruiser, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and terror. Through the passenger window, he watched his daughter running with more purpose and energy than she had shown since the night Carmen disappeared. Whatever was happening, Emma seemed to understand it on an instinctual level that transcended normal child psychology. "She's been having dreams," Miguel told Detective Chun as they followed Rex's zigzagging path through the city streets. "Every night for 6 months, Emma wakes up crying and saying, 'Mama scared, Mama cold.' The doctor said it was just trauma processing, but what if she was actually sensing something real? What if Emma has some kind of connection to Carmen that we never understood?" Dr. Patricia Williams, who had joined the search caravan in her own vehicle, was documenting every detail of Emma's behavior and vocalizations. The child's transformation from selective mutism to active communication was unprecedented in her 20-year career treating traumatized children. Emma wasn't just speaking, she was providing specific information about her mother's condition and location that seemed to come from an impossible source. Rex suddenly veered away from the main roads and began leading them toward the outskirts of Phoenix, where urban development gave way to desert landscape. The terrain became increasingly rugged and difficult to navigate, but the German shepherd's pace never slowed. If anything, he seemed to be gaining urgency as they moved further from civilization. Officer Martinez noticed that Rex's search pattern was becoming more focused and linear. Instead of the circular and backtracking movements he had displayed in the city, he was now moving in an almost straight line toward something specific. Her radio crackled with reports from other police units that were trying to keep up with their unusual search party. But Martinez ignored the chatter. Her entire focus was on reading Rex's behavioral signals. "He's locked on to something definitive now," she reported to Detective Chun over her shoulder. "This isn't exploratory searching anymore. Rex knows exactly where he's going, and he's trying to get there as fast as possible." Emma's small voice cut through the desert air with startling clarity. "Mama in dark place. Mama can't get out. Mama waiting for Emma." The 3-year-old's words sent chills down every adult's spine. How could a traumatized child who hadn't spoken for 6 months suddenly provide such specific information about her missing mother's situation? The search party crested a small hill and found themselves looking down into a valley dotted with abandoned mining operations from Arizona's copper boom decades earlier. Rex immediately began descending toward the valley floor, his nose working overtime as he navigated between rusted equipment and dangerous-looking mine shafts that had been left unsealed when the operations shut down. Detective Chun felt a cold knot of fear forming in her stomach as she realized where Rex was leading them. The abandoned mining area was a known hazard that the county had been meaning to secure for years, but had never gotten around to addressing. The old shafts were hidden beneath decades of brush growth and desert debris, creating invisible traps that could easily swallow someone who wasn't watching their step carefully. "Jesus Christ," she whispered into her radio. "Dispatch, we need the fire department's rescue squad out here immediately. We're at the old Copper Mountain mining site, and I think someone might have fallen into one of the abandoned shafts." Rex suddenly stopped at what appeared to be an unremarkable patch of desert scrub and began barking with an intensity that Martinez had never heard from him before. His entire body was rigid with alertness, and he was alternating between loud, urgent barks and low whines as he paced back and forth over a specific area of ground. Emma ran directly to where Rex was indicating and dropped to her knees, pressing her small hands against the earth. "Mama here," she announced with absolute certainty. "Mama down there. Mama been waiting so long." As Detective Chun approached the spot where Rex and Emma were focused, she noticed that the ground surface looked different from the surrounding area, slightly depressed and covered with vegetation that seemed newer than the established desert plants around it. When she brushed away some of the surface debris, she could see the unmistakable outline of a concealed opening that led down into darkness. The rescue operation that was about to unfold would become one of the most extraordinary recoveries in Phoenix Police Department history. The moment Detective Sarah Chun's flashlight beam penetrated the concealed opening in the desert floor, the harsh reality of what they had discovered hit everyone like a physical blow. The mine shaft descended at least 40 feet into complete darkness, its walls lined with jagged rock formations and rusted mining equipment that had been abandoned for decades. But it wasn't the treacherous conditions that made Chun's blood run cold. It was the faint sound echoing up from the depths below. Someone was down there, and they were still alive. "Carmen?" Miguel Rodriguez's voice cracked as he called down into the darkness, his hands shaking as he gripped the edge of the opening. Carmen, can you hear me? It's Miguel. We are here to get you out. The response that drifted up from the bottom of the shaft was so weak and distorted that for a moment, everyone thought they might have imagined it. But Emma Rodriguez had no doubt about what she was hearing. "Mama!" She screamed down into the darkness, her small voice echoing off the rocky walls. "Mama! Emma here. Emma, bring help." Officer Martinez had to physically restrain Rex from attempting to rappel down the mine shaft himself. The German Shepherd was in full rescue mode, whining and pawing at the opening as if he could somehow reach the person trapped below through sheer determination. His behavior confirmed what everyone was beginning to accept as impossible reality. Carmen Rodriguez was alive, and she had been trapped in this abandoned mine shaft for 6 months. Phoenix Fire Department Rescue Squad Captain Tom Bradley arrived on scene within 12 minutes of Detective Chang's emergency call, bringing with him a team of specialists trained in technical rescue operations. As his crew began setting up their equipment, Captain Bradley peered down into the shaft with a powerful spotlight and shook his head in disbelief. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," he muttered, his 20-year veteran composure cracking for just a moment. "If someone's been down there for 6 months and they're still alive, it's nothing short of a miracle. The conditions in these old shafts are brutal: no light, minimal air circulation, and temperatures that fluctuate from freezing at night to over 100 degrees during the day. The technical challenges of the rescue were staggering. The shaft was too narrow for standard rescue equipment. The walls were unstable from decades of erosion, and they had no way of knowing Carmen's physical condition, or whether moving her would cause additional injuries. Captain Bradley's team would have to improvise a rescue system using climbing ropes and a specially modified rescue basket that could navigate the shaft's tight confines. Dr. Patricia Williams watched in professional amazement as Emma continued to communicate with her mother, calling down encouragement and receiving faint responses that seemed to energize the child more with each exchange. Emma's displaying behaviors that challenge everything we know about child psychology and trauma response, she documented on her digital recorder. She's not only communicating normally, but she's demonstrating knowledge about her mother's condition. That should be impossible for a 3-year-old to possess. As Captain Bradley's most experienced rescue specialist, firefighter Lisa Morales, began her descent into the shaft, Emma suddenly grabbed Detective Chang's arm with surprising strength. "Mama's leg is broken," the little girl announced with complete certainty. "Mama been drinking water from the rocks, but she can't move. She's very cold and very scared, but she knew Emma would find her." Morale's voice crackled through the radio communication system as she reached the bottom of the shaft. "Base, I've got visual contact with the victim. Female, approximately 35 years old, conscious but severely dehydrated. She appears to have a compound fracture of the left leg and possible hypothermia. But guys, she's alert and responsive. I repeat, we have a live rescue situation down here." The next 30 minutes became a carefully orchestrated dance between ground support and the rescue specialist 40 feet below ground. Carmen Rodriguez, despite her 6-month ordeal, was conscious enough to assist with her own rescue by following Morale's instructions for securing the rescue harness. Her voice, though weak, carried up through the communication system with startling clarity. "Is Emma okay?" were Carmen's first coherent words that reached the surface. "Please tell me my baby is okay. I've been hearing her voice in my dreams every night, telling me to stay strong. That help was coming." Miguel Rodriguez broke down completely when he heard his wife's voice for the first time in half a year. "She's perfect, Carmen," he sobbed into the radio microphone. "Emma led us right to you. Our daughter saved your life." The medical aspects of Carmen's survival bordered on the miraculous. According to Dr. Sarah Martinez from Phoenix General Hospital's emergency department, who had been helicoptered to the scene, Carmen had survived by collecting rainwater in pieces of discarded mining equipment and had maintained her body temperature during cold desert nights by burrowing into piles of old canvas tarps left behind by the mining operation. The human body's capacity for survival never ceases to amaze me, Dr. Martinez explained to the growing crowd of rescue personnel and news crews. Mrs. Rodriguez has lost approximately 30 pounds and is suffering from severe malnutrition and dehydration, but her vital signs are stable. The broken leg appears to have healed improperly, which will require surgery to correct, but she's alive against all odds. As the rescue basket carrying Carmen Rodriguez finally emerged from the mine shaft, Emma's reaction was pure, uninhibited joy. The little girl who had been silent and withdrawn for 6 months launched herself toward her mother with a shriek of happiness that echoed across the entire desert valley. Carmen, despite her weakened condition, managed to wrap her arms around her daughter and whisper, "I heard you calling me every night, baby girl. I knew you would bring help. Mama's here now, and we're never going to be apart again." Rex, meanwhile, sat calmly beside Officer Martinez, his rescue instincts finally satisfied now that his mission was complete. The German Shepherd's extraordinary tracking abilities had just pulled off what would later be called the most remarkable search and rescue operation in Arizona state history. The mystery of how Emma had maintained some kind of psychic connection with her trapped mother would never be fully explained. But the Rodriguez family didn't care about explanations. They cared only about being together again, against all odds, and thanks to the remarkable partnership between a traumatized little girl and an extraordinary police dog who had refused to give up when everyone else had lost hope. The helicopter blades created a thunderous whirlwind of dust and debris as the Phoenix General Hospital Medical Transport lifted off from the desert floor, carrying Carmen Rodriguez toward the most critical phase of her survival story. Inside the aircraft, Dr. Sarah Martinez worked frantically to stabilize her patient, while Emma, still clutching her mother's hand, refused to let go despite the paramedics' gentle attempts to give them working room. "Mama, don't go to sleep," Emma whispered urgently, her small voice barely audible over the helicopter's roar. "Emma, stay with Mama forever now. No more dark hole. No more being scared." Carmen's eyes, sunken from months of malnutrition, but blazing with determination to survive, never left her daughter's face. "I'm not going anywhere, baby girl," she managed to croak through cracked lips. "Mama fought every single day to come back to you. I heard your voice calling me when I wanted to give up." At Phoenix General Hospital, the medical team that greeted Carmen's arrival had been briefed on what they were about to encounter, but nothing could have prepared them for the reality of treating someone who had survived 6 months in an abandoned mine shaft. Dr. James Patterson, the hospital's chief of emergency medicine, had seen countless trauma cases in his 15-year career, but Carmen Rodriguez presented challenges that pushed the boundaries of modern medicine. Her body has essentially been in survival mode for half a year, Dr. Patterson explained to Miguel as Carmen was rushed into the trauma bay. The human organism has remarkable adaptive capabilities when faced with extreme conditions, but we're dealing with severe dehydration, malnutrition, muscle atrophy, and what appears to be a badly healed compound fracture that will require immediate surgical intervention. The medical examination revealed the true extent of Carmen's ordeal and the miraculous nature of her survival. Her body weight had dropped from 135 pounds to just over 100 pounds. Her muscles had significantly deteriorated from months of limited movement, and her skin showed evidence of prolonged exposure to harsh conditions. Most remarkably, however, her vital organs had somehow maintained enough function to keep her alive despite the extreme circumstances. Dr. Rebecca Chun, the orthopedic surgeon called in to assess Carmen's leg injury, was astounded by what she found during her examination. The fracture occurred approximately 6 months ago and has healed incorrectly. creating a malunion that will require surgical rebreaking and proper realignment, she explained to the assembled medical team. But somehow, Mrs. Rodriguez managed to stabilize the injury, well enough to prevent life-threatening complications like infection or severe blood loss. Emma had to be physically separated from her mother during the emergency medical procedures, and the 3-year-old's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. The little girl who had been silent for 6 months suddenly became inconsolable, screaming for her mama with an intensity that brought nurses to tears. It was Rex who once again provided the solution to an impossible situation. Officer Jennifer Martinez had followed the medical transport to the hospital, and when she heard Emma's distress through the emergency department doors, she made an unprecedented decision to bring Rex inside. The German Shepherd, still wearing his official K9 vest, walked calmly through the hospital corridors, as if he understood that his job wasn't finished yet. The moment Rex entered the family waiting room, where Emma was having her breakdown, the child immediately threw her arms around the dog's neck and buried her face in his fur. "Rex, Mama is getting fixed," she sobbed into his coat. "Doctors making Mama's leg all better." Rex helped Emma find Mama, Dr. Patricia Williams, who had been documenting every aspect of Emma's remarkable psychological breakthrough, watched in professional fascination as the child's bond with Rex provided the emotional stability she needed to cope with separation from her mother during the medical crisis. Emma is demonstrating resilience patterns that we typically don't see in children who have experienced this level of trauma, she noted in her clinical observations. Meanwhile, inside Operating Room 3, Carmen Rodriguez was fighting the most critical battle of her 6-month survival story. The surgical team, led by Dr. Chon, worked for 4 hours to correct the malunited fracture while simultaneously addressing the systemic effects of prolonged malnutrition and dehydration. Anesthesiologist Dr. Michael Torres had to carefully balance Carmen's medications, as her body's weakened state made standard dosing protocols potentially dangerous. "Her body has been running on pure willpower for months," Dr. Torres explained to his colleagues during the procedure. "Every system is functioning at minimal capacity, but somehow she's maintained enough strength to survive what should have been unsurvivable conditions." The psychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Williams revealed the extraordinary mental fortitude that had enabled Carmen's survival. Through careful questioning, they learned that Carmen had maintained her sanity during the months of isolation by creating elaborate mental conversations with Emma, planning their reunion in minute detail, and never allowing herself to believe that rescue wouldn't eventually come. "I knew Emma was out there somewhere, trying to tell people where I was," Carmen explained weakly from her recovery bed. "Every night I would hear her voice in the darkness, telling me to be strong, that help was coming. I thought I was hallucinating from dehydration, but now I know she was really communicating with me. Somehow, the blood evidence that had been used to build the murder case against Miguel finally made sense when Carmen explained what had happened on the night of her disappearance. The couple had indeed argued, but it was about Carmen's decision to take a late-night hike alone to clear her head despite Miguel's concerns about desert safety. When she tried to leave, Miguel had grabbed her arm to stop her, accidentally causing a nosebleed when she pulled away. The blood on his shirt was from his attempt to help her stop the bleeding before she stormed out of the house. "I was so angry and stubborn," Carmen wept as she recounted the story. "I insisted on going for that hike, even though it was dangerous. If I had just listened to Miguel, none of this would have happened. He tried to protect me, and instead, I put our whole family through hell." The mineshaft accident had occurred when Carmen, hiking in unfamiliar terrain in the darkness, had stepped on what appeared to be solid ground that was actually a concealed opening covered by decades of accumulated brush and debris. The 40-foot fall had broken her leg and left her trapped in a place where no one would think to search. As news of the miraculous rescue spread across Phoenix and then nationally, the Rodriguez family found themselves at the center of a media storm that brought attention to everything from abandoned mine safety to the psychological bonds between parents and children. But for Miguel, Carmen, and Emma, the only thing that mattered was being together again, saved by the extraordinary partnership between a traumatized little girl who never stopped believing and a remarkable police dog who refused to give up when everyone else had lost hope. 1 year later, the Rodriguez family home in Phoenix had been transformed from a place of tragedy into a symbol of hope that attracted visitors from around the world. The small suburban house, once marked by police tape and surrounded by news trucks documenting a murder investigation, now hosted a steady stream of researchers, journalists, and families dealing with their own missing person cases who sought inspiration from the most miraculous rescue story in Arizona state history. Carmen Rodriguez sat in her favorite armchair on the front porch, her once emaciated frame now healthy and strong, watching as 4-year-old Emma played in the yard with Rex, who had officially retired from active police duty to become the family's permanent companion. The German Shepherd, now wearing a specially designed vest that read "Miracle Dog" instead of his former canine markings, had achieved celebrity status that included a book deal, a made-for-television movie, and invitations to speak at law enforcement conferences across the country. "Rex, catch!" Emma shouted with pure joy as she threw a tennis ball across the yard. Her voice, clear and confident, bore no trace of the selective mutism that had once held her captive for 6 months. The little girl who had been unable to speak was now one of the most articulate children her age that Dr. Patricia Williams had ever evaluated, displaying an emotional intelligence and resilience that continued to amaze child psychology experts. The medical follow-up on Carmen's recovery had defied every prediction made by the Phoenix General Hospital trauma team. Dr. Rebecca Chun, the orthopedic surgeon who had reconstructed Carmen's leg, recently documented that her patient had achieved 98% normal function despite the severity of her original injuries. "Mrs. Rodriguez's healing has been extraordinary," Dr. Chun explained during a medical conference presentation. "Not only did she recover full mobility, but her bone density and muscle mass have returned to normal levels that we typically don't see in cases involving this degree of prolonged malnutrition and immobility." Miguel Rodriguez had returned to his construction job, but his life had taken on dimensions he never could have imagined during those dark months when he faced life in prison for a crime he didn't commit. He now served as a volunteer advocate for wrongfully accused defendants, working with the Arizona Innocence Project to help other families navigate the legal system when circumstantial evidence threatens to destroy innocent lives. "People ask me if I'm angry about what happened," Miguel explained during his appearance on the nationally syndicated morning show, Good Morning America. "But how can I be angry when the same circumstances that nearly destroyed our family ultimately brought us closer together than we've ever been?" Emma learned she has a strength inside her that can move mountains. Carmen discovered she can survive anything. And I learned that love really can conquer impossible situations. The legal ramifications of the Rodriguez case had created precedent-setting changes throughout the Arizona court system. Judge Margaret Harrison, who had made the unprecedented decision to suspend the murder trial based on a 3-year-old's interaction with a police dog, had been initially criticized by legal scholars, but was ultimately vindicated when the case study was published in the Harvard Law Review as an example of judicial wisdom transcending rigid legal protocols. Prosecutor Rebecca Sterling, whose carefully constructed murder case had collapsed in a matter of hours, had initially faced professional embarrassment, but eventually became an advocate for legal system reforms that would prevent similar wrongful prosecutions. She now taught seminars at Arizona State University Law School about the dangers of building cases purely on circumstantial evidence without considering alternative explanations. Detective Sarah Chun had been promoted to lieutenant and placed in charge of a new Phoenix Police Department unit specializing in cases involving missing persons and potential wrongful prosecutions. The Rodriguez Protocol, named after the family's case, now required investigators to consider alternative theories and to utilize specialized resources like therapy animals when dealing with traumatized child witnesses. Rex's story had captured international attention and sparked research into the extraordinary capabilities of specially trained police dogs to detect and respond to situations that transcend normal sensory input. Dr. Michael Stanford from the University of California's Animal Behavior Research Center had spent months studying Rex's abilities and published findings, suggesting that some dogs might possess sensory capabilities that allow them to detect human distress across greater distances and time periods than previously understood. What Rex accomplished in the Rodriguez case challenges our fundamental understanding of canine sensory perception, Dr. Stanford explained during his presentation at the International Conference on Animal-Assisted Therapy. His ability to locate Carmen Rodriguez after 6 months, using what appears to be a combination of traditional tracking skills and some form of empathic connection with the child Emma, opens entirely new avenues for research into animal consciousness and interspecies communication. Emma's psychological recovery had become a case study taught in medical schools and psychology programs worldwide. Dr. Patricia Williams had documented every aspect of the child's journey from traumatic selective mutism to her current status as an emotionally healthy, highly communicative 4-year-old who showed no lasting negative effects from her ordeal. Emma's case demonstrates the remarkable resilience of the human spirit, particularly in children who maintain strong family bonds even under the most traumatic circumstances. Dr. Williams wrote in her published study, her psychic connection with her mother during Carmen's captivity, while unexplainable through current psychological models, provided the foundation for both their survival and their eventual reunion. The Rodriguez family's story had inspired legislation requiring better safety protocols for abandoned mining sites throughout Arizona and other western states. The Carmen's Law Initiative, championed by the family themselves, mandated systematic surveys and proper sealing of dangerous abandoned mining operations that had been left unaddressed for decades. On the first anniversary of Carmen's rescue, the family returned to the mine site for a memorial ceremony that included hundreds of supporters, law enforcement officials, and media representatives from around the world. Emma, now confident and articulate, placed a wreath at the site where Rex had first detected her mother's presence. This scary hole tried to keep Mama away from Emma forever, the 4-year-old announced to the assembled crowd, her voice carrying clearly across the desert valley. But Emma and Rex were stronger than the scary hole. Emma and Rex brought Mama home. Rex, sitting calmly beside Emma throughout the ceremony, seemed to understand the significance of the moment. When Emma finished speaking, a German shepherd approached the mine shaft, opening now safely sealed with concrete and marked with a memorial plaque, and sat in the exact position he had assumed 1 year earlier when he first alerted rescuers to Carmen's location. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, the Rodriguez family stood together at the site of their miracle, watching the Arizona sunset paint the desert landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Emma held one of her mother's hands and rested her other hand on Rex's head, creating a living symbol of the unbreakable bonds that had defied death, overcome injustice, and proven that love, courage, and hope could triumph over even the most impossible circumstances. The story of the 3-year-old who spoke 2 words to a police dog and changed everything had become more than just a rescue tale. It had become a testament to the power of faith, the strength of family, and the remarkable connections that exist between all living beings when faced with life's greatest challenges.